All right, second graders, this is it. This is the last segment I'm going to read to you. So, no matter how long it takes, I'm finishing this book right now. Chapter 73, The Chase. Rico 1 was standing on the Great Meadow. Now, Rico 1 is the only one left. Remember, the bears destroyed Rico 2, and the birds and the moose and the deer and the weasels and the beavers and the rabbits, they destroyed Rico 3. Okay, so Rico 1 was standing on the Great Meadow. He stared up at the smoky hill of ash and then down at the stampede of footprints around it. There had been a large bonfire with hundreds of animals and one robot, but why? Rico couldn't make sense of what he was seeing. After thoroughly exploring the site, he continued through the meadow and into the forest. It was around that time that he lost communication with Rico 3 and then Rico 2. He knew that his partners had both been destroyed. Rico 1 would have to hunt for the target by himself. The hunter marched his blocky head and he swiveled to the side and to the side, scanning for any sign of Roz. He was soon gazing across the grassy surface of the beaver pond. On the far side of the thread of smoke drifted up from another of those wooden domes. With his powerful legs, the robot launched himself up and through the air, soaring in a high, graceful arc over the pond and down to the other side. His heavy feet slammed onto the ground, leaving deep craters in the garden by the dome. He hunched over and looked inside. Fur and feathers, dying coals of a fire, but the target wasn't in there. The Rico stood perfectly still and watched as a soft rain started dripping down through the tiers of the forest. And then he sensed it. Up in the canopy was something that didn't belong. Roz had been spotted. The hunter watched his target drop from branch to branch down to the forest floor. Then she bounded away through the thickly tangled underbrush without stirring a leaf, without snapping a twig, and vanished into the green. However, Rico 1 had other means of tracking her. He had sensed her electric signal, a signal that was gliding around the edge of the pond, but it was fading fast. A few more seconds, he would lose it entirely. Rico 1 burst into a sprint. The forest seemed to sway and to quake with his stomping strides, and a minute later, the forest really did begin to move. Trees were toppling down onto the Rico. He fired his rifle, and 2 toppling trees turned to ash. But then a third swung down through the smoke and hammered onto his body. Rico 1 shoved the tree aside, pulled himself up, and continued the hunt. He didn't notice the beavers diving back into the pond. Rico 1 tore through the brambles, leaped over boulders, and suddenly the ground was caving beneath him. Down he fell into a deep pit, crashing against the bottom, twisting his leg. The robot violently pounded his leg back into shape. Then he launched himself up and out of the pit. He didn't notice the groundhogs watching him from their tunnels. The hunter faced one trap after another. He was pelted with flaming pine cones, tripped by taut vines, crunched by tumbling rocks. The hunter now limped and rattled and was covered in scars. But he kept going. Roz galloped back and forth across the island again and again as she tried to lose Rico 1, but no matter how fast she ran, no matter how well she hid, no matter how many animals helped her, she couldn't escape the sounds of the hunter's footsteps. She had never run so hard for so long, and while her mechanical body was holding up, her wooden foot was not. After hours of relentless pounding, it finally gave out. She was galloping through the rocky forest of the sea cliffs when her foot splintered apart. As soon as Rico 1 found the fresh wooden splinters, he knew his target was in trouble. He stomped out from the trees onto the cliff top and scanned the coastline below. Geese were flying down through the drizzle. Otters were wriggling over the rocks. Seaweed and driftwood and broken robots' parts were scattered about of the shore. But the hunter also sensed a faint electric signal. Roz was down there somewhere. The hunters... I'm frozen. Oh, there I am. The hunter's blocky hand clamped onto the cliff top, and then thwip, it detached. The hand was connected to a strong cable that spooled out from the end of his arm. He gave the cable 2 quick tugs, and then he stepped off the ledge. So the Rico has created a zip line. He throws his hand, it flings off, and it's a cable. So the Rico 1 zipped down the cliffside, one arm releasing the cable and the other clutching his rifle. He slowed to a gentle stop as he reached the ground. Then, high above the robot's hand, unclamped and followed the cable all the way down until it snapped right back to the end of his arm. So that's a hard thing to visualize, but if you can kind of visualize him using a cable that shoots out of his hand as a zip line. Geese squawked, otters squeaked as Rico 1 marched through the robot gravesite. The place was littered with torsos, limbs, and heads, and they were all valuable parts, but he would collect them later. For now, his only concern was finding Roz. He followed the electronic signal over a clump of seaweed, but where was his target? Was Rico 1's sensor malfunctioning? The robot tapped his head a few times, but the mysterious signal remained. He looked around for other signs of her, and as he did, a clump of seaweed reached up and grasped his rifle. Chapter 74, The Click. 4 robot hands were clamped around the rifle. Rico 1 loomed above. Roz lay below, camouflaged in seaweed. For a moment, all was still, and then the hunter suddenly lurched and twisted as he tried to rip the rifle away from his target. But Roz held on. Seaweed fell from her body as she lifted right up off the ground. Her legs dangled in the air until she pounded a foot and a stump against the hunter's broad chest, leaned back, and pulled the rifle with all of her strength. Waves crashed as the robots grappled for the weapon, but Roz was no match for Rico 1. The hunter was too big and too brutal. Roz could feel her body being pulled apart, but she could also feel the rifle being pulled apart. The faint glow appeared between her hands. The glow was getting brighter and brighter, and then a blinding explosion launched the robots in opposite directions. Oh my goodness. Look at that. When the smoke cleared, shards of rifle were everywhere. Rico 1's body was pocked with holes. One arm was charred and crippled. Roz's arms and legs, oh my gosh, had been blown completely off. She was now just a torso and a head. And inside her computer brain, her robot survival instincts were blaring. Her battered body simply could not take any more damage. Clearly, Roz was not designed for combat, but the Rico was. He pulled himself to his feet and hobbled towards his target. Roz wanted to get up and run away, but without arms and legs, our robot couldn't move. She could only speak. "Please do not deactivate me," she said. Rico 1 ignored her. His blocky hands reached past her face and touched the back of her head. Click. Chapter 75. With the target deactivated, Rico 1 calmly moved on to the next phase of his mission. He limped through the gravesite and began collecting every single robot part. He splashed into the shallows and returned afoot. He shook the sand from a cracked torso. He pulled a head out of a tide pool. Each part was piled around Roz's body. Brightbill watched in horror, and as his mom slowly disappeared under a pile of parts. Roz looked just like the other robots. She had simply been shut down. "Don't do it, Brightbill," the flock tried to stop their leader. "It's too dangerous." But the goose was determined to bring his poor mother back to life. Brightbill crouched low to the ground, slowly moved towards the pile of robots, where Rico 1 limped away to collect another part. Brightbill sprinted over the rocks, pushed past the arms and legs and squeezed into the pile. Click. A muffled voice echoed across the shore. "Hello, I am Rosum Unit 7134, but you may call me Roz." Brightbill hugged his mother. Her computer brain rebooted. "Mama, wake up." "What happened?" she said finally. "Where's the Rico?" "He's coming this way." "What are you thinking, Brightbill? You must leave now before he kills us both." "I was scared, Mama," cried the goose. "I don't know what to do." Heavy footsteps stomped towards them. The robot parts were knocked aside. And then Rico 1 looked down with his glowing eyes. Brightbill tried to squirm away, but thick fingers locked around him like a cage. "Mama, help!" cried Brightbill as he was pulled from the pile. "Please do not hurt my son," begged Roz. "He is harmless." Rico paid no attention to Roz. He just held up the goose with his giant hand, ready to crush him. Mist swirled in the breeze. Waves sloshed against the rocks. Seagulls circled around. No, not seagulls, vultures. And one of them clutched something silver in his talons. The vultures spiraled down. Rico 3's rifle clattered onto the shore. Geese and otters quickly surrounded the rifle. They squawked, they squeaked, they fumbled, trying to aim the clunky thing. The hunter was confused. How had the animals gotten the rifle? And could they possibly know how to fire it? They did know. The geese seen the trigger pressed before. The beam of light briefly flashed through the gloom. At first, it seemed as if nothing had happened. But a moment later, Rico 1's chest began glowing, a bright orange, and then it was melting and oozing down his front. And soon there was a wide, gaping hole in the middle of his torso. His hands suddenly unclenched, and Brightbill fluttered away. Seawater sprayed over the gravesite. Steam hissed up from the Rico's scorching hot guts. It shook, it twisted, it collapsed beside Roz. Rico 1 turned his face to Roz and spoke in a quiet voice. "More Ricos will come for you if you don't destroy them. Still more will come. And if you destroy them, the makers will not rest until all the missing robots have been retrieved." When will they come?" said Roz. "How long do we have?" "You can still be fixed, Roz. Go to the airship. Bring all the robots' parts with you. The ship knows what to do." His voice was silent. His eyes went dark. Rico 1 had been destroyed. Chapter 76. The Broken Robot. Geese and otters were bustling all over Roz. They were pulling arms and legs out of the robot pile. They were pressing them against her body. They were hoping to hear a thwip sound and that the robot's limbs would snap right back into place. Roz would return to her old self and life on the island would go back to normal. But nothing happened. No matter what they did, the limbs wouldn't attach. Our robot's body was too badly damaged. "I'm sorry, Mama," said Brightbill, his voice trembling. "I thought this would work." "It's okay, son," Roz said calmly. "I am lucky. I can still think and speak." The animals tried to smile at their poor friend, but they couldn't hide their sadness. Roz was a mangled wreck, and it was nothing they could do to fix her. The robot wanted to be strong for her son and her friends. She wanted to ease their worried minds and tell them that everything would be fine, but Roz knew that everything would not be fine. She looked down at her broken body. She looked at the geese and the otters and she said, "I will need some help getting home." Chapter 77. The Meeting. Strong, nimble creatures carried Roz up the sea cliffs and across the island. They carefully propped her up inside the nest. They built a fire, and then they had left the robot with her son. Roz and Brightbill sat there staring at the flames until the goose finally said, "Do you need anything, Mom?" "I could really use a new arm and leg." And the robot chuckled to her own bad joke. "That isn't funny," cried the goose. "My mother is broken, and I don't know what to do about it." "I'm sorry for joking." Roz adjusted her voice to a more serious tone. "I know you want to fix me, but there is nothing anyone here can do. At these words, her son looked away. Brightbill, I'm afraid we have to make a difficult decision. I think you should arrange a meeting of our closest friends. We could use their advice. The goose disappeared out the door, and soon Roz's oldest and wisest friends were on their way. Loudwing was the first to arrive. She limped into the lodge with her injured foot and sat close to the robot. Mr. Beaver appeared next, followed by Fink and Swooper, then Tawny curled up on the floor. Mother Bear was too badly hurt to make the journey, so Nettle came in her place. She sat in the garden with her enormous head jutting in through the doorway. Brightbill returned with Chit-Chat, who was nursing her burnt tail, and the last one to crawl in was Craig, the old turtle. Once everyone was there, the meeting began. The group talked all through the night. They discussed the Ricos. They discussed what to do about Roz. They discussed how to keep the island safe. There was a stark difference in opinion. Tempers flared. But by daybreak, the group had agreed a plan of action. The morning, the dawn truce didn't take place in the great meadow. Instead, it took place in the small meadow at the foot of the mountain in front of the airship. Weary animals quietly hobbled into the clearing. Only sounds came from a gurgling brook that wound through the gathering and right past our robot. Roz sat on the wet grass. She was leaning against the rock. She looked so sad and frail. However, she still had her thoughts and her words, and for a moment, that was all she needed. "Good morning, animals of the island," Roz's voice filled the meadow. "I must look strange to you, all beaten up like this, but I hope I still sound like your old friend." Hundreds of heads nodded. "You fought bravely yesterday. You risked your lives defending me, and I am eternally grateful. But many of our friends are wounded. Some may not recover, and there is worse news. Before the last Rico was destroyed, he told me that more of his kind will come to our island. They might already be on the move. And even if we defeat them, still more will come. My makers will not rest until all of their property has been retrieved. They want the robots, they want the broken parts, and they want me." The crowd was silent. "But I care about this island far too much to put any more lives in danger, and so, my friends, I must leave." Voices cried out, "Don't go, Roz. Next time we'll be prepared. We'll risk our lives if you could stay." "I hear you." The voice cut through the den. "But look at me. My body is ruined. The Rico said the only ones who can help me are my makers." "What if he lied?" howled a voice. "You can't trust those monsters." "You're right," said Roz. "He might be lying. There may be no hope for me. But that is a chance I'm willing to take. Animals, you taught me to be wild. I want to be wild again. And so I must try to get repairs I need. And it is for the good of me and the good of the island that I return to my makers." The calm settled over the crowd because they knew Roz was right. All right, we've got a couple more chapters. Let's see if we can make it through. Chapter 78, The Farewell. Our robot had an army of animals at her command, and she asked them to bring every robot part and rifle back to the airship. Absolutely nothing. Everything had to go. It was the only way to be sure the Ricos would never come back. The island animals had trouble locating the remains of the robots. Retrieving those remains took a bit more effort, but they were up to the challenge. Teams of clever creatures returned with robot parts of different shapes and sizes, smashed head, broken rifles, twisted tubes, heavy bodies. They were all loaded onto the ship until the entire island had been cleared. Even the tiniest scraps were collected. It's amazing what an army of animals can do. A light mist was falling when they finally heaved Roz through the ship's doorway. Her head slowly turned around to face the crowd of geese and beavers, the owls and insects and foxes and raccoons and vultures and moose and bears and possum and fish and deer and otters and turtles and woodpeckers and squirrels and frogs and hares and on and on. Every animal on the island had come to give the robot a proper send-off. "Goodbye, you wild animals," Robot's voice echoed through the gray mist. The wild animals smiled, and then a few of them started to roar. They started to screech. The moors started to howl, chirping, grunting. Soon, every creature was howling goodbye at Roz. Chorus of wild voices grew louder and louder, shaking the robot's body, rattling the ship, and booming across the island and up into the clouds. And then the voices gradually died down to silence. Bright Bill fluttered up to his mother's shoulder. "You understand why I must leave," said the robot. "I understand," sniffed the goose. "More Ricos could be headed here right now. I just don't know. There's just so much I do not know. I think it is time for me to get some answers." "Will I ever see you again?" said Bright Bill, wiping his eyes. "You are my son. This is my home," said Roz. "I will do everything in my power to return." Bright Bill hugged his mother's worn face. "I love you, Mama. I love you, son." The goose fluttered back to his flock. The robot took one last look at her home, and the door hummed close. Chapter 79, The Departure. The airship's engine automatically fired up. Then the ship slowly floated above the island, turned to the south, and disappeared into the clouds. The sky. Our story ends in the sky, where a robot was being whisked away from the only home she had ever known. As Roz sat in the airship, broken and alone and speeding towards a mysterious future, she looked back at her miraculous past. Reader, it must seem impossible that our robot could have changed so much. Maybe the Ricos were right. Maybe Roz really was defective, and some glitch in her program had caused her to accidentally become a wild robot. Or maybe Roz was designed to think and learn and change. She had simply done those things better than anyone could have imagined. However, it happened. Roz felt lucky to have lived such an amazing life, and every moment had been recorded in her computer brain. Even her earliest memories were perfectly clear. She could still see the sun shining through the gash in her crate. She could still hear the waves crashing against the shore. She could still smell the salt water and the pine trees. Would she ever hear or smell those things again? Would she ever climb a mountain or build a lodge or play with a goose? Not just a goose, a son. Bright Bill had been Roz's son from the moment she picked up his egg. She had saved him from certain death, and then he saved her. He was the reason Roz had lived so well for so long. And if she wanted to continue living, if she wanted to be wild again, she needed to be with her family, her friends, on her island. So as Roz raced through the sky, she began computing a plan. She would get the repair she needed, she would escape from her new life, and she would find her way back home. And that, my friends, is The Wild Robot. Now, there is a second book, Wild Robot Escapes. So, if you really liked The Wild Robot and you want to know what happens next, a good summer read might be Wild Robot Escapes. Now, I want to note that this is like a 4th grade reading level-ish, like 3rd or 4th grade reading level. So, if you're a really advanced reader, you probably could muddle through on your own. However, this might be a book, like a good family story, bedtime story kind of read. I hope that you enjoyed the story. I enjoyed reading it all over again to you. I don't know, I love it. I love Roz, and I'm excited to see who reads Wild Robot or The Wild Robot Escapes this summer. Boys and girls, continue this week with our choice board for Roz. And next week, we will be doing something a little different for the month of June. All right, boys and girls, have a great day. Bye.